A few years ago I went through a phase of wanting to find adventure in the quiet, offbeat corners of my life. I wasn't looking for danger, but it seemed to find me. This story is a strange one, and it began on what should have been just another ordinary day. I was living in a small town in the Midwest, a place where everyone knew everyone, and things never changed. My apartment was a little outdated, but the rent was cheap, and it had a small porch where I could sit in the evenings, drink coffee, and listen to the quiet hum of the world around me. I didn't have many close friends in the area, but I was content. I had work during the day, and I'd spend my evenings either catching up on TV shows or reading books. But one evening, something changed. I had just returned home from work around 7 p.m. The sky was darkening and the air felt heavy, like a storm might be on its way. My neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Whitaker, was sitting on her porch, as she usually did, rocking gently in her chair. "Mrs. Whitaker? Evening, Nora. Nora? Evening, Mrs. Whitaker." She motioned for me to come closer. "Mrs. Whitaker, you wouldn't happen to know if anyone's been out in the woods behind the houses lately, would you?" "Nora, no, not recently. Why?" Her expression grew serious. "Mrs. Whitaker, I've been hearing noises at night, strange sounds like footsteps shuffling, and the other night, I swear, I saw someone walking out there, just standing at the edge of the trees, watching. Nora, you're sure, Mrs. Whitaker?" "I don't know, dear, but it's unsettling. You should be careful if you're going out there at night." I nodded politely, though I didn't take her warnings too seriously. Mrs. Whitaker was known to be a bit eccentric, but that evening, as I sat on my own porch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wind had started picking up, and the trees behind the houses swayed ominously, their branches creaking and groaning. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint shuffling sound coming from the direction of the woods. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. Footsteps, soft and slow, almost like someone was creeping through the trees, moving cautiously. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the sound persisted. I pulled the covers over my head and told myself it was nothing. The next morning, I decided to take a walk through the woods. I hadn't been back there in months, but something was pulling me in. The sky was overcast, and the air felt thick with humidity, like a storm was brewing. As I made my way through the trees, I noticed something strange. The usual path I took seemed to have changed. The underbrush was denser than I remembered, and there were deep, jagged marks in the bark of some of the trees, as if something had clawed at them. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I felt a little uneasy. The further I walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, nothing but the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It wasn't long before I stumbled across something I didn't expect, a small clearing in the woods. I'd never seen it before. But the most unusual thing about it was the pile of sticks and branches in the center. It looked like a crude makeshift structure, like something had been built there. At first I thought it might be an animal's den or some kind of shelter, but the way the branches were arranged seemed deliberate, almost too neat for something that would just occur in nature. I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer to the pile, bending down to examine it, and that's when I saw it. A small carved symbol on one of the branches. It was something I didn't recognize, a twisted design like a knot or a swirl, but it gave off a sense of malevolence. My skin crawled. I had seen symbols like it before in books about occult practices, but I never thought I'd encounter something like that in real life. I decided to leave. I turned to walk back the way I came, but as I did, I felt an odd sensation, like someone was watching me. I looked over my shoulder, but the woods were silent still. I chalked it up to my nerves, but the feeling persisted. It was as if the trees themselves were closing in around me. Just as I was about to exit the woods, I heard a rustling sound ahead of me, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible voice. It was a whisper, too faint to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably urgent. I froze, trying to listen more carefully, but the voice seemed to come from all around me, like it was coming from the trees themselves. My heart began to race. I started walking faster, then broke into a run. As I neared the edge of the woods, I glanced over my shoulder one last time, and that's when I saw it. A figure, a tall, dark silhouette standing just inside the trees, barely visible through the thick foliage. It was watching me, unmoving. I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel its gaze. I didn't wait to see if it moved. I sprinted back to my apartment, barely able to catch my breath as I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me. I was shaken. The fear didn't leave me all day. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the woods. It wasn't just the figure, but the whole place. It felt wrong, unnatural, like something was lurking there, waiting. That night I tried to go to sleep early, hoping to shake off the anxiety that had settled over me, but as I lay in bed I heard it again, the same soft, shuffling sound coming from this direction of the woods. This time I didn't try to ignore it. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and quietly opened the door to my apartment. The fog had rolled in again, thick and suffocating. The trees outside looked like shadowy spectres, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I stood there, flashlight in hand, unsure of what I was hoping to find. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing just at the edge of the woods, watching me. It was tall, but this time I could make out more details. Its face was pale, its eyes black and hollow, and its mouth was twisted into a grin that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, unable to move. It was the same figure from earlier. The voice that whispered from the woods echoed in my mind. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not alone, and whatever was out there watching me didn't belong in this world. I snapped out of my trance and bolted back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the lights on, my eyes glued to the window, but the figure never returned. The next morning I packed my things and left. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had followed me, that the woods were hiding something I wasn't meant to understand. I never went back to that apartment, and I've never spoken to Mrs. Whittaker about it. I left the town shortly after, moving to a new place with no trees, no fog, and no eerie whispers in the night. But I still hear it sometimes, the soft shuffle of footsteps in the distance, the faintest whisper on the wind, and I wonder if something is still out there, waiting for me to come back. I hope you enjoyed the story. It was a bit of a build-up, but I wanted to make sure the atmosphere and tension developed slowly. Let me know what you think.